Would it be in the storage room maybe?
What do you need?
The thermometer covers.
There was enough.
There's only two.
Oh, I thought there was more than that. Okay.
Laura says there's only two.
Well, I saw more, but. Okay, so we are now recording.
So those that are in the conference room, we are recording this session. You have to all agree that it can be recorded. So is there anybody that would be against having this meeting recorded? Hearing no objections, we'll continue with the recording. Okay. So I'd like to call to order the SVFR Budget Committee meeting for fiscal year 21, May 7th, 5 p.m. I'm the budget officer, also the fire and EMS chief for SVFR. And if you all would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance first. And you can see there is a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United
States
States
of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice
for all. Well, that went much better than last time. With the audio delay, sometimes it can be difficult. So Holly, would you do the roll call, please?
All right, Budget Committee members, John Murphy, Ann Stonelake. Here. Raymond Hull.
Here.
Ed Groshans.
Here.
Marvin Tipler.
Here.
SVFR directors, Director Green.
Here.
Director Hickson.
Here.
Director Burns. Director Polisi.
Here.
Director Spade.
Here.
Is that it, Holly?
That's it.
Thank you. So you all have received the budget document, either in onboard or actually a physical copy. Within that was included my budget message. I was not going to read that verbatim unless somebody would like me to do so. I will be going over all my points in my budget presentation, so I will be covering everything. But I'd like to waive reading the budget message unless there's an objection to that. So the first order of business is to nominate and appoint a budget committee president. Currently serving is John Murphy. He is not here tonight, but we need to nominate and appoint a new president.
I nominate Marvin Tipler.
Do I hear any nominations?
I second.
Was there a nomination? I didn't hear that.
I second Ed Groshans.
So,
Okay.
Chief, Ann Stonelake nominated Marvin Tipler.
Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And there was a second.
And I second.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, all in favor, raise your hand. I think that'll be easier. Are you counting, Dina?
1, 2, 3, 4. I can 5. Ned Hickson.
Aye.
Okay, and Sam? Thank you. Okay,
Now, do I continue or do we turn this over to the president?
we turn it over to Marvin Tipler.
President Tipler.
Let's conduct the 2020 budget meeting. I'd like to turn the meeting over to our budget officer, please.
Okay. Let me turn up my volume here. Okay. We need to approve budget committee minutes from last year. Hopefully you all had a chance to read those. So I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
So it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from May 9th, 2019. All in favor, raise your hand. I think that's unanimous. And I don't see anyone from the public in our meeting. Is that correct? Okay,
Correct.
so then we'll go to a review of the 2021 budgets, fiscal year 21 budgets. And I have a PowerPoint presentation, which you all now should see, correct?
Yes, we do.
And you should see nothing else, just the
Yes.
PowerPoint.
We
Okay,
only see your PowerPoint.
perfect. We've practiced this several times, but you never know. Okay. Oops. So I want to start off with just a brief overview of where we are for the current fiscal year. We haven't yet taken complete advantage of the levy reset, which was approved last year. But this levy reset is going to be critical in our ability to enhance service to our citizens, including replacing some very old vehicles, which we currently own, begin repairs on some of our facilities. And I think you'll see that reflected in the budgets that we're proposing tonight. But for fiscal year 20, our current fiscal year, everything is on track as budgeted. We have included a budget versus actual report, and that'll be in tab 2. And on board, it should be listed in the agenda as where tab 2 is. But if you have a hard copy, it's in tab 2. I'm not going to go over that in detail, but we certainly, at any point, if you have any questions, just ask. We did see a small impact in the budget when we transitioned from the IGA agreement we had between SVFR and Western Lane when we transitioned to the fire authority. So SVFR lost a revenue source that was coming from Western Lane, but then this is countered with lower personnel costs for SVFR. So we still feel that forming the authority was a net positive financially for both districts. But in general, with only 2 months left in this fiscal year, we are below budget on expenditures, which is good. Some of that is due to having 2 open positions, which we have not filled, and I'll go into more detail on that. And part is due to some very tight control on spending. I feel as a new fire chief, I had to understand where things were being spent and on what. So I did delay some purchases until I understood the need. But we'll start to see some of that spending ramp up. For example, we have to upgrade some obsolete computers, and we'll be doing that shortly. And we've added a part-time firefighter position, mainly to help with this COVID pandemic, our staffing. So that'll be reflected in some increased spending. But everything is within budget, and I anticipate that we'll be significantly under budget for the year, which is good.
I have a question there, Mike, if I could.
Absolutely.
We've got a budget versus actual for ending in March 2020.
That is correct.
So that's 9 months. So how can we say from a budget standpoint, with us sitting here, that we're below budget on the categories?
So you talking in specific categories or just overall?
Well, I'm saying overall, and there's some specifics, like we've got some at 100% and over 100% and 402% in other income. And all I'm saying is, how are we assured that we're under the actual budget?
I think if you go to page 3 of the budget versus actuals, you can see that we're just a little over $1 million below. We have expenses for the next, well, it'd be April, May, and June, which aren't reflected here.
Yes.
Because our revenue stopped. Of course, majority of our revenue came in November with property taxes. So we'll be spending that down. But then a lot of that is the levy increase, which we didn't take advantage of as much this year because we weren't sure that we were going to have it approved when we developed our budget. So a lot of that was just put into contingencies and into capital. So I think you can see on page 3 that we are quite a bit under budget.
Is that the 406,000?
That was what we had budgeted for the year. It's the column left of it, the actual.
Right, we're showing net income and we're showing deficit 406,000. Does that mean we're at this point for 9 months, we're 406,000 under budget?
No, that was what was budgeted. That's not the actual. That's not what actually happened. And Dina, maybe you can, maybe I'm not explaining that correctly, but you can pitch in.
So we have 3 columns in that report. Your first column is your actual numbers.
Through
Your
March.
middle column is your budget numbers. And then we have the percent of budget. So on that total expense line, about 2/3 the way down the page, you have the actual of $1,795,000 that we have spent so far. The budget so far is 2.8 million. And this report is 9 months of the 12-month fiscal year. We should be at 75% if we were right on track, but we are at 63.88%, which means we are under budget. Does that make more sense?
Well, I guess I'm just confused on, we're saying those are actual through March. So would it make any difference if we had April's actual figures?
We did not have time to prepare that because we just posted April's payroll yesterday. So, and I had to have this packet out at the beginning of the week. So there just wasn't time to provide that information. So,
So that number would be smaller in the actual column because, again, we have no more revenue coming in, but we do have expenses. So we expect that number to continue to decrease. We don't think that it's going to get, well, it will not get into negative balance. We'll have a positive balance at the end of the fiscal year. Does that answer your question, or?
Well,
And we can talk.
I think it does, but I'm just,
Okay.
I think in years past, we've been closer like at 10 months, so we can kind of extrapolate where we
Yes.
would be actual versus projected.
But you got to remember, we had with the levy reset, it's a extra funding, extra tax revenue,
Yes.
which we didn't budget to spend that, all of that.
Yeah,
So we
that
do
was
expect to have
because that was
yeah.
because we raised the levy rate.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
So Chief, this is Sam. Can I ask a question here?
Yes, sir.
All I want to tell everybody that I'm new on the board, so I've got some probably elementary questions here, but just for my education. On that page there, you got other income, where actual 32 and it was budgeted for 8,200. What is that other income? How come it's so much different than what the budget was?
So where are you looking, Sam?
On the page that we had the budget versus actuals for fiscal year 1920, it's
Yep.
line item 4850.
On page 1 of 3.
Oh, okay.
account number 4850 on page 1.
Right.
So you're asking what
The
is
budget,
that?
the budget was 8,200, but we got 32,000. I just wonder why there's such a large increase in. Did
Yeah.
they sell something, or was that?
Yeah, we get a lot of reimbursements. If you hold on, I'll pull that up right now.
Well, that's okay. I was just wondering why there's such a disparity in the two numbers.
Yeah, there's some revenue that it's tough to predict.
Okay. Other question on 4,800. It says conflag reimbursements. I'm not familiar with that terminology. What's that mean?
So conflag, that's the terminology used in the state for when we deploy to assist other agencies with wildland fires. We get paid to do that. So it counts as revenue. It would also count as expense. We would pay that out. But they will pay for all the resources, people, or vehicles, equipment that we send. And they will also pay to backfill positions here for like overtime. So we have to budget it to spend it, and that's why it's there. But that's the terminology they use.
When do we get the money?
Oh, that's a good question. We haven't done any this year. There is no revenue from that.
Okay, okay,
So that's why it's not, but there's no expenses either.
okay, thank you.
Hey, Michael, this is Ron Green. Just a quick question. So with respect to operating expenses, do you think there's anything extraordinary in the last quarter of the fiscal year?
There is not. We have some minor things like the computer replacement, but we haven't touched that budget line yet, and we budgeted 30,000 for the year.
Okay.
All the major expenses are done.
So at total expenses through 9 months of $1.8 million, that's $200,000 a month. We could safely assume that we're probably going to have $400,000, or sorry, $600,000 in expenses for the quarter, roughly, if we straight line that.
Correct.
And we have a $600,000 surplus in budget, so it's likely that we'll still be slightly above, but closer, right?
That is my belief. I agree.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're where we should be.
Yes.
I can go back and answer Director Spade's question about the other income. We do have residents, firefighter residents out at living at 3 outer stations. So they pay for half of the electric bill each month. So we have about $15,000 of that that they have paid us over the last 9 months to pay for the electric bill. And then we also sold a vehicle at a surplus auction for $7,200. And the rest of it is interest from Lane County taxes.
Okay, thank you very much, Dina.
You're welcome.
All right. So when preparing our budgets, we identified 3 major events which we feel could impact our ability to forecast an accurate budget. Our desire is always to present a budget to the committee in which we're 100% confident in the numbers presented. But as we discuss these impacts, you probably see how they could inject some variability into our predictions. And we identified 3, and the employee actions, which I'll go into more detail on all these, but we had 2 employee actions. We had a COVID-19 pandemic, of course, which we've never experienced before. So we'll talk a little bit about how that potentially could impact us. And then labor negotiations, which really is, if I had to pick one of these that is impacting us the most, it would probably be labor negotiations. We are just in the middle. We have not talked economics with the bargaining unit, with the union. So we have no idea what our final labor and benefit costs might be. We know around where they're going to be, but we don't know if we're going to have to agree to an increase, if there's going to be a decrease. So you'll get just keep that in mind when we're looking at the numbers, is that, we're negotiating what these final numbers will be with the union. So during the current fiscal year, we dropped our full-time staffing by 2. One was due to administrative action, and we dropped another position due to a resignation. And at this time, we haven't replaced either position. And so we've seen an approximate decrease in our personnel costs of about 10%. With the administrative action, it was a termination. Unfortunately, we're currently in binding arbitration with this action. And that'll determine whether or not our administrative action was prudent. We certainly believe it was, and we believe very strongly in our case, but there is a potential that an arbitrator could rule against us. And if that does happen, we'd be liable for wages and benefits from when we took the action in August of 2019. We placed that into the budget just in case for that. The resignation we had was our operations chief, Jim Dickerson. We had anticipated that this might happen, and we'd actually started planning early in the fiscal year for that. Jim had been talking about, he wanted to move up, take a step up. So we knew that was coming. And we had a lot of discussion between Chief Dickerson and Chief House and myself, is how can we solve that issue for not only SVFR, but could it benefit Western Lane as a Western Lane Ambulance District. And what we came up was to move Chief House, who was the operations chief for the ambulance district, into a dual operations role. So he was covering operations for the fire department and for the ambulance district. So that led to a cost savings for both districts. But really, it's important to remember that that's the role that both Jim and Matt were filling already. They were both sharing operations duties, so it was easy for Matt just to transition into the fire operations positions. We are still evaluating this. We want to make sure that it's best for, or makes sense for both departments in the long term. And it is working, I think, much better than I expected. Matt's doing a great job. But if we need to, we always can replace the operations chief position and just move Matt back to operations for Western Lane. So you'll see, and later on in the presentation, you'll see with the authority budget, we've got a training division chief, and it was our intent to hire a training division chief to oversee training for SVFR and the ambulance district. If we need to, we can use that funding. We would hire an operations chief, possibly an operations/training chief to look after training. It could just be an operations chief though. So we have that in the budget. So we can either use that for the operations chief, fire operations chief, or a training chief. And you'll see that later on.
Is that the 120,000?
It's 100,000. Oh no, you're looking at the.
I had a question.
That was for the arbitration.
How did we, if we're not successful in winning that case,
Yes.
what would the 120,000 represent? The second part of my question is if you had to rehire, I don't know if that's possible, but if you had to rehire, what effect would that have on the budget as far as salary and benefits?
So yeah, the 120,000 would cover wages and benefits from August of 2019. We have no idea what the arbitrator could say. He could say complete coverage of wages and benefits, and you have to rehire him. We have placed in the budget 3 positions. We feel with the levy increase, and that was our promise to the citizens to enhance service. So we do have 3 positions that we're proposing. So it would be one of those positions. So we would only hire 2 new, bring this individual back. It's possible that the arbitrator could rule that way. Again, we feel very strongly in our case, of course, but we just have to prepare for that possibility.
This is Marvin. I'm holding my hand up. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
My memory is completely different than yours. When we, as the budget committee, including the board, at this time last year, voted to increase to the maximum amount we could collect, I don't remember ever talking about enhancing service and adding employees. We talked about capital equipment. We talked about stations and equipment. That's where that money needed to go.
And that's all included. You'll see that in the budgets.
Adding 3 firefighters, it was a complete shock to me when I seen this budget, and it flabbergasted me to think that a small district like ours, where we haven't had a major increase in fire calls, is talking about adding 3 employees all in the same year. To me, that does not make sense for a small community like this.
This would be considered, we'd be considering moving to a 24/7 schedule. So we would have 2 on duty, only 2 on duty at one time. We wouldn't continue the 40-hour-a-week schedule.
Like I said, once you spend the money on employees, it'll never be there for your equipment and your stations. And the former board was very specific on the money was to be used for capital equipment. I know we have a new board now, and obviously you guys must be going in a different direction. But let me tell you, I'm completely opposed to you spending money on 3 new firefighters. Our call volume has not increased, and just because we up the tax base doesn't mean you have to spend it.
Well, yeah, I agree with you 100% on that last part. The first part is, I think you'll see that we're covering all our capital needs without any problem at all. And that's the one
Maybe
thing
we should
that
lower the tax rate back down then.
No, Marvin, I disagree with you. And I'm going to have to chime in here. This is Jim Polisi. Marvin, the previous boards, everybody wants to be fiscally conservative, and I totally agree with that. But our call volume, it may be decreasing on certain times. It is seasonal, but we should truly be on a 24/7 schedule. We're alone out here. We're isolated. We don't have reliable mutual aid or auto aid with anyone. And just to say that this is how it should be, how it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, whatever. The point of the matter is we need to increase our services. Time is critical from that first 911 call. We don't even have enough personnel to cover an incident within an incident. And to say that the clock only runs between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. is ludicrous. We should truly, if our ambulance district's on a 24/7 schedule, why isn't the fire department?
Well, I have answers, but obviously we see it completely different. This community relies on volunteers and,
But they're not volunteers, Marvin. They're paid called firefighters.
you can call them what you want to call them. I disagree with you. I've lived in this community for 57 years and served this fire district for 35 years. I know it quite well. I say I disagree with hiring 3 new firefighters all in 1 year. Everybody else in the room may disagree with me. That's okay. I just needed to say what I had to say. I've said
And
it.
that's
Let's move on.
and that's good, but you got to remember, we won't even be at a 3-0 staffing. This will be a 2-0 staffing.
Yeah,
So-
there's only so much money.
Exactly.
Only so
And
much money.
and firefighter safety is very important. And if we're going to have an all-risk agency, which we truly do have, you need to be there 24/7. You just can't say that that window is from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Right?
Well, I disagree with you, but let's move on.
Okay.
Okay, so the second major budget impact, well, we're still not sure if it's going to be an impact, but is the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Expenses have certainly gone up a little bit. We've had to increase our purchase protective equipment, PPE, because our use has increased greatly. We anticipate some of that may be reimbursed by the government. We don't know that for a fact, but we are anticipating we might get some of that. But it's been small increase in expenses. So in general, we don't feel that we're going to see much of an impact, certainly this fiscal year, possibly next fiscal year. We might see an impact on the revenue side with taxes through our tax collection rate. So in this table I'm showing you now, it's just a comparison of fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20. It shows our total assessed valuation. And I'm going to go through how our property tax is calculated. I'll do it real briefly. If there are more questions, I think it's very interesting. But if there's more questions, certainly stop and we'll answer those. But you see, the number that we're interested in is that bottom number through the fiscal 20 column, the tax collected. And the way they calculate tax collected, of course, is on the value of the property. That's the property tax bills come in, and that's our tax collected. So I've got 2 graphs here. And really one is on the left is for SVFR, and the one on the right, which is a little bit clearer, that's why I put it in there, is for Western Lane Ambulance District. So the state looks at 2 values when they're looking at property taxes to be paid. The real market value, which I've shown here in the yellow line, is what your property would sell for on January 1st. But then the taxable value, which was set, I believe this was 1997, it was in the 90s, and they took real market value, subtracted 10%, and that started the taxable value for properties. and that can increase at most 3% per year. So your property tax bill is based on what's lower, either the real market value or the taxable value. And typically that's been the taxable value. So you see that in 2012, that's when the fire district and the city merged, and so you see that big jump in assessed value. But I think without that, you would have seen the same decline in real market value that you see for Western Lane in that right graph, which is why I put it there. So it decreased until about 2013, 2014, and then we've seen a general increase in the real market value. And this is corresponded with the 3% increase in the taxable value. So for us to see a decrease in taxes collected, or taxes imposed, sorry. So for us to see a decrease in taxes imposed, the real market value would have to drop about 30%, which of course we hope doesn't happen. But that would have to be a major drop for us to see. So that would just be taxes imposed. So even if we don't see a 30% decrease in the real market value, it's possible that some people may not be able to pay their taxes, or may have to defer their property tax payments, which would lead to a decrease in our revenue. But it's important to remember, this would only be a deferral of taxes owed. The tax liability would remain with the property. So we assume at some point we'd recoup that revenue. So I think our conclusion is, at least for the near term, at least for the year or so out, COVID-19 is not going to impact our revenue, at least. And then probably the briefest slide here, but probably the most important, is our labor negotiations, which are undergoing right now. We're right in the middle. Like I said, we've made no economic proposals yet to the union. We've received none from the union, so that's still all up in the air. So the current collective bargaining agreement, which specifies wages and benefits for our employees, our firefighters, expires on June 30th of this year. And our major cost in just about any organization, is going to be your wages and benefits. And part of the collective bargaining agreement would specify what the wages and benefits are going to be. So it's tough to predict exactly what our labor costs are going to be. We're taking a stab at it. We have a pretty good idea. We know that we do have to make some cuts for long term. But again, it's an unknown yet what labor negotiations or what the result will be of those negotiations. So because we have those variabilities, those impacts, we've prepared two budgets, although we're going to really focus on budget one. We feel budget one is a functional budget. It does get us to where we want to be. It's financially secure. I think it's a good budget overall. But you'll see in the columns, budget one and budget two. Budget one represents wages that are pretty much status quo. Possibly it could have a cost of living agreement in there. Again, that would be dependent on labor negotiations. Healthcare and PERS costs would remain as they are now. Those are significant costs to the district. There's no getting around that, but again, I think within budget one, we're comfortable with including those. We've done budget two, which represents a much leaner budget. And really how much of the things in budget two that actually do appear in the final budget will be a result of the labor negotiations. So in our mind, budget one represents, it's a worst case financially. It's not a bad case. I think financially the district is in good shape, but it would be the most expensive for us, but it's certainly a budget I think we can afford.
Question, Michael.
Absolutely.
We have two proposed budgets, number one and number two. Number two, it shows the effect, if I'm reading it right, of the wage freeze.
Yes, sir.
In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, how can we justify wage increases and sell that to the public taxpayers? That's my question number one. Question number two, we're collecting the assessed taxes at 97%. What if that turns out to be, in a worst case, 90%?
Yeah, good questions.
Well, it would seem like to me that if we were to make a proposed number two, it would include not at 97%, but at a lesser number. In other words, more of a worst case scenario, because these two budgets, you net it out, there's only $4,000 difference. And that's very insignificant in my mind.
Well, yeah, and we'll discuss that. There's more difference than that. Financially, no, there's not that much difference.
Right.
But where the money goes is much different. In budget two, more of it's going to contingency, which is our savings account, in essence. But let me get to your questions. So how can we justify a wage increase? Some of that is out of our control, the district's control. That's up to what happens during labor negotiations. There could be an agreement for a specific wage increase or a wage decrease. That is something that would have to be agreed upon by the district board as well as the union, the bargaining members. If we can't reach an agreement, then we have to go to binding arbitration, where an arbitrator then will pick which offer applies to the district. So that could be the firefighters' offer, the union's offer, which has a much larger increase. So it's sort of out of our hands. We are going to negotiate at a minimum increase, if any. But again, it's something that we have to bargain in good faith. We have to get both sides to agree. And then your second question, so 97%, that is typical. So our tax collected is always a little bit lower than tax imposed.
Right.
If you pay your taxes early, you get a 3% discount, and a lot of people take advantage of that. Some people just don't pay their taxes. And I did talk to Lane County Assessor because I had that exact question. I mean, how is this going to impact us? And his answer was they're anticipating maybe a 1 to 2% decrease, but certainly not anything that's in double digits or would be close to 90%. So again, it's an unknown. I don't think our taxes imposed are going to change, but definitely it would be taxes collected.
Yes.
So that's a good question, something to keep in mind.
That's what I'm asking, because if I were to make two different budgets, I would be more severe with the collections of the taxes in light of the pandemic. Because it just seems like to me that people may not have 2 or 3, 4, 5,000 to pay those taxes when due, and they may be put on a special program. I don't know.
That's a great question. It's something that we've talked at length about, because yeah, you're absolutely right. It does concern us. We figure that we have an elderly population.
Yes.
Many of them are on fixed income. Are those fixed incomes going to be changing? I'm not sure. I don't know that answer. Would they still be able to pay their property taxes? Will there be some government-induced delay of having to pay your taxes? I don't know. That could impact us. But I'm thinking with the data I have, with what I can see, I can't really tell if there's going to. I don't think there's going to be a severe impact on our revenue.
Well,
Michael, this is Ron. Can I jump in with a comment?
Absolutely.
I think just to the board debated this extensively, Ed, and I think from my perspective, in my own professional life, trying to predict the economic environment and its impact on my company, but there's such an unprecedented situation that we're in, and given a lot of the things that the chief has already said, we tried to say, well, we should budget some reduction, but the idea is, well, how much? There was no precedent, even through multiple recessions of review, to say, well, it should be this or that. So I think we decided that what we would go through and budget the historically the amount that's been collected, and then recognize that clearly, if it's less, then there's going to have to be a mid-year budget adjustment or some sort of financing contingency that's developed. There are resources that the district can tap into in an emergency situation. But it was debated and discussed extensively, I will say.
Right. I've known you, Ron. I truly believe that. All I'm saying is if we have two budget, what would be wrong with the rationale of it saying reducing that from the 2741 down to like 100,000 less? And explain it by saying because of the unknown, but we've allowed for some drop in the and then you could adjust the contingency then, which is up 150,000.
So yeah, I think, yeah, some of that would be captured. So even though we have two budgets, we're considering revenue to be the same for both. In budget 2, we have a much higher contingency, which we're not spending that in budget 2, where it is dedicated in budget 1, but we're still, there would be that funding there. We feel in both budgets that we do have some revenue that we could readjust where it's been apportioned. For example, we could drop what we're putting into the PERS unfunded liability, which and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We could drop how much we're putting towards capital, or move some capital purchases out a few years, like what's been done in the past. So we have a lot of options, and I think you'll see that reflected in the budgets.
I see. Yeah. So you think we're safe enough on the contingency if we have a shortfall on collections of monies that we have a place to go somewhat?
Yeah, because we'll know in November when collections start coming in. All our tax collections come in November, some in December. So we'll know fairly early before halfway through the budget year. And a lot of these major expenses we would push out until after we're sure that we're going to have stable funding.
Okay, that explains it.
Chief Schick,
Yes, sir.
it's Jim Polisi. I got a question for you on,
Sure.
There's been some talk about the potential closing of Station 2 and Station 7 on Oak Street.
Uh-huh.
For the amount of money that we're spending on those two firehouses right now, especially Station 7 that's vacant. Is there any thought to giving those back to the city of Florence?
There is. That would be part of our strategic plan review.
Okay.
Certainly, we're leaning towards Station 2 just because of the repair and maintenance of that facility.
Right.
Station 7, we use that a lot for storage.
Okay.
But that's going to be part of the discussion with the board. What do we see our future needs for?
Right, because between the two, that's almost a $12,000 savings, right there.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. So if we get into the budgets, like I just said, revenue is pretty much the same for both budgets. And the only reason that budget 2 is slightly lower is that we have some grant revenue that is paying for our recruitment and retention position. And if we don't give raises, then our revenue would decrease. We wouldn't need that revenue to cover the raise. So that's the only reason there's that slight difference. So it's pretty much, you can consider revenue the same, which makes sense. I mean, a revenue is going to be consistent, but it is what it is. And then you also see in your tab 2, there's a couple other documents which we're not going to go over. Table 4A, which is just a standard table that's given to us or is published by the county, Lane County. And that shows assessed valuation of the district. It shows taxes imposed for the current fiscal year. We don't know what the new Table 4A will look like for fiscal year 21. Has not been released yet. It should be soon. Typically, we've been seeing a 3 to 4% increase in assessed valuation, and I think at least we'll probably see that now. Next year, it may be a little bit different if there are some impacts of COVID-19.
So Mike, I have a question for you. Why does it say Douglas County on that table 4A?
That's the second one. We actually cover, our district goes into Douglas County. You can see it's a very small amount, but we do cover part of Douglas County.
Well, the amount's 2.8 million. That's quite a bit.
No, I think, that's not, no, we only get like $4,000. Let me look real quick.
Well, I know on the other sheet, I saw that there was 4,000 something, but there's on the second table, there's table 4A, there's two of them.
Well, that's the total taxable assessed value. So that's just what the property tax, the levy rate is applied to that assessed value. So the rest of the district is $1.8 billion assessed value as compared to Douglas County, which is only 2 million.
If I may add, I think that it's a little confusing because at the top of the first page on line 3, it says Douglas, but
Correct.
that's counties in which district lies. And then on the next page, your joint county is Lane. So it's just the fact that they've got them titled a little strange the way they publish them.
Are you
Okay.
looking at the second table 4A, Sam?
There's two of them. The second one does say, it says the joint county is Lane, but the primary county is Douglas.
Right.
Correct.
And
That's
the
where
first,
we get $4,500 from.
Right. But the first page, it shows the county which district lies. It says Douglas. That just doesn't make any sense.
yeah,
Yeah, that's just how they do it. But that just means there are additional counties.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mike, this is Marvin. I have a question. Now that we're at the maximum tax rate, can we get up to a 3% increase every year from now on? Is that like it used to be in the old days?
You get 3% on the taxable value. Say your question again, Marvin.
So we raised the millage up to our maximum. But
Right.
once we did that, now every year we can raise that number 3%. Is that correct?
No, the levy rate is fixed at 1.5417. It cannot go any higher. That's our maximum rate. Now, the assessed value can go up, and so we would collect more revenue. But the rate cannot, yeah, that's the maximum rate.
Thank you. You answered my question.
One more question, just
Sure.
for my own edification. PERS. We stuck 150 in to hopefully cover some of the unfunded liability.
Yes.
What's your best guess? You knew I was going to ask this. With the stock market the way it is, and the earnings on PERS, our state is going to have, and because of the pandemic, I don't know what's going to happen, but PERS is probably going to suffer.
Yeah, Ed, I've got a slide coming up. I've got a slide coming up where we're talking only about PERS, and I think it'll answer a lot of your questions. And
Okay,
we can
good.
certainly open it up that to debate. No, that's a good question. So now, if you look at tab 3, we're going to start looking at expenses with personnel services. It's not my intent to go line by line through the budget. You have line by line, and we can certainly answer any questions. I'm just touching, I couldn't fit it all on a PowerPoint slide, but we certainly can talk about it. So with wages, remember the difference between 1 and 2. 2 was wage freeze, and budget 1 was a possible cost of living agreement, depending on what comes out of the labor negotiations. We haven't changed what we're budgeting for volunteers. Volunteers are still a very important part of our response efforts. We have severely underspent that amount over the last couple of years. We're working very hard to expand our volunteer base. We understand how important they are. We've come up with some options, which are going to cost us a little bit more money, but we're also providing them the opportunity to come and do shifts with the career firefighters. They can be here at the station for 12 hours, and then we will give them a stipend for that. So we're looking at more ways to increase participation of the volunteers. But since we've been underspending in that category, we're keeping it where it is in both budgets. Now with health benefits, you see a big difference, and that would be just for career and career employees with the fire department. Administrative staff, it's important to remember all the administrative staff have been moved to Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority. So this budget does not reflect directly for our administrative staff. That would be under the payment for Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when I'm showing these wages, that's only for firefighters, and this includes 3 firefighters, very clear. So that included an additional 3 firefighters in both budgets. But it's only includes firefighters. And then with the health benefits, right now we have the most expensive plan. It's what we call option 1. We have a list of about 6 different options offered by the Special District Association of Oregon, sponsored by them, through them. We're proposing to go to a less expensive healthcare option. But again, that is part of labor negotiations. So I'm not sure which way that would go. So you're seeing budget 1 where we don't change anything, and budget 4 we go to the most severe cuts that we're proposing. And then with PERS, there's 2 lines here, PERS CO and then PERS PU. And what they represent, PERS CO, that represents the standard retirement amount that we have to pay to PERS. That's 24.6% of wages. And that will continue. That was the rate this year. That's the rate for this upcoming fiscal year. And then we're anticipating approximately a 5% increase in that coming up. So that, and we'll talk about more of that with PERS. But there's also the PERS PU. There's also an additional 6% that is put into, it's very similar, I understand it as similar to a 401k for the employee. The employee doesn't have much control over it. But it will be paid out at their retirement. But that's an additional 6% of their wages, which right now is paid completely by the employer, paid by the district. And that's shown in budget 1. In budget 2, we're proposing to move that to the employee. So they would have to pay that out of their gross wages. It can't be split. It has to be either employer paid or employee paid at 100%. Okay. So
Hey, Mike,
yes.
on line 15, that amount is almost double what it's been in the past. Is that because of the drug testing required?
Line 50, what tab, where are you? You're line 15?
Line 15 on that page we just on.
Yes. We're assuming, yeah, we're proposing random drug testing for all employees. And so there would be a cost, and that cost would have to be borne by the district. But you're correct,
Okay.
Sam.
Okay.
Okay, now we get into PERS. So PERS, again, that's the state retirement program that we're in. As of beginning of this fiscal year, the current fiscal year, our unfunded liability was $1.8 million just for SVFR. That's SVFR's share of the unfunded liability. The state came up with a match program. If you put a certain amount into a side account with the state, they would match it with 25%. So the district board voted to place $300,000 into the side account, and the state added $75,000. So that decreased our unfunded liability from 1.8 to $1.4 million. Now, the 25% match was great. It went very quickly. That was available to all districts in the state, so we were lucky to get in on that. But that's money then that we have no control over anymore. It does decrease our unfunded liability, but we can't ask for that money back. If we had a financial emergency, that's money that stays with the state, stays invested by the state. But going forward, we would still like to address our unfunded liability. And so these budgets show $150,000 a year And instead of placing it into the side account, I think the intent of the board was to place this into a district-controlled fund. So we would put it into a savings account, collect interest, but then it would be controlled by the district. We could apply that to our unfunded liability at some point in the future. If the state came up with another match program, we could use these funds. But I think the intent of the board, and that could change, they would still have to vote on this, was to place that money into a district-controlled fund. And if we do 150,000 a year, unfunded, and everything stays the same, and it's hard to predict with PERS, anything with PERS, but we predict that we would have the 1.8 million covered by 2029. It's a big unknown. What if we don't pay our unfunded liability? Would that impact retirement payments? Possible. I don't think anybody really knows what the impact is. We're not the only district that has an unfunded liability. The vast majority of districts have an unfunded liability, primarily due to inaction or difficult actions that the state legislature has taken. So until they fix the problem, we're still at it's an unknown what that impact is going to be on us.
I have a question for you. Where did the 375,000 come from that you put in to the PERS?
300,000 came from, we moved that from capital, and then the 75,000 came from the state match.
So just a question for you. So when you're moving, I thought if you moved more than 10% of any materials and service, personnel service, or capital, you had to reconvene the budget committee to do a budget amendment. Is that no longer the case?
I'd have to, I don't think so. I think the board did approve this. I don't know if you have to reconvene the budget committee.
To my knowledge, according
The board
to,
just does it then.
yeah, so according to
Okay.
budget law, the responsibility of the budget committee is what you're doing right now. You're approving the budget, and then it moves to the board to adopt, and then anything past that is a board decision.
Got it. Makes sense. Sounds like you did a good move.
I
We
think
hope.
it's a good move to set 150,000 aside every year instead of letting the state have it.
Yes.
That 150 you said is if you do set 150 aside each year into a special fund, that money could be dual purposed, right? You could use that for dry period financing money, maybe?
You could use it for whatever the board decided to repurpose it for. I think our intent would be not to touch it and then use just budget for dry period financing. But yeah, if we had a financial emergency, that would probably be high on our list of funds that we could go to.
That was the original discussion when we were talking about what we wanted to do with that, was so that we would have the option of using it in the event of some sort of an emergency or dry period issue, like we had a while back with the conflag not getting paid up front, and we didn't get our property taxes soon enough. It kind of put us in the bad position. So that money would be, rather than just submitting it to the state, it gives us an opportunity to have something in the bank that we could draw from if we really needed it.
Makes perfectly good sense.
Smart move.
So then in tab 4, we're looking at material services. Really, there's no major difference. The only difference is in what's being paid to the Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority. So if you remember, we moved all the administrative personnel to the authority, but we're doing the payments come out of materials and services because that's an agreement with another agency. So that's where you put it. So even though WellFIA payments are in material services, it's going to personnel services for WellFIA. So hopefully I don't confuse anybody with that, and the only difference you see is in budget 2, the WellFIA payment, and this would be just from SVFR, Western Lane Ambulance District pays half of the WellFIA. Well, they pay 51% and SVFR pays 49% of the WellFIA cost. And the reason it's a little bit lower in proposal 2 is that typically it's customary that if you negotiate, whatever you negotiate with the union is applied to administrative staff. So if the union has to take a cut in wages and benefits, it's possible that could be applied to the staff. It's not set in stone. That would be up to the board to decide what to do, the Welfare Board. But that's why you see it as a little bit lower in budget 2. But again, that's an unknown. It would have to be set by the boards. And our capital, which is the
So
next.
Mike, on that one page of administration, line 16 there, board of directors, is that going from 8,000 down to 5,000 because we're all going to take a pay cut?
Yeah, I think we put some of that into, well, again, it's what we spent. And then we've also got some room in Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority for the board members. So those board members serve on 2 boards. So we didn't want to duplicate. So we've split it, spread it around.
That was said in a humorous way.
Yes, yeah, I know. I was going to make a crack about how costly it is to fly, but
All right.
I want you to take me up again.
You bet.
So I won't do that. So now we get to capital, which is one of the areas that I think we do have to focus on as a district. I think for many years, just financially, the district couldn't afford to really invest into capital and facilities, and it's showing now. And I think that's what happens when you don't have proper funding and you're limited on revenue. Typically, you cut back on facility maintenance and capital. So we really feel very strongly that we have to address that.
Chief, can I make a quick comment? In the tab worksheets in tab 5 on the operations capital outlay, there was an error. You see one column off to the right, instead of budget 1 and budget 2, the title is actual April 2019 to March 2020. That was my error that I forgot to correct. That should be, those titles in those worksheets should both be proposed 2020 like they are on all the other sheets. My apologies.
And those numbers are wrong too. So.
Yes, sorry about that.
That's okay. So here's what we want to spend on capital. And I've got an apparatus replacement plan, which I'll show you. I'll go through some of the slides just to show you that we do have a plan and what we're looking at. So our intent is to transfer $375,000 from general fund into capital. So that's what we need. And looking at our replacement plan, you'll see that we need an average of about $375,000 a year. Some years we'll spend much more, like we're proposing for this next fiscal year to spend $490,000 in capital, which of course is not covered by the 375, but we do have a capital fund balance now. And some years we'll be paying much less. So on average, I think this just helps us to budget a little bit easier. If we plan on putting $375,000 a year into our capital budget, and I'll show you what I believe the ending fund balance will be each year for the next 10 years or so. But that's how we get by with it.
Hey Chief, Ron
Yes.
Green here. Last year when the board and the budget committee, contemplated the millage rate change, there was a very thoughtful discussion and presentation on how much we should allocate in capital, as far as the allocation to savings, and then also the apparatus and other replacement schedule. And that's kind of what led to the proposal a year ago. Is there any dramatic changes in the methodology a year ago as compared to what you're proposing today?
I think we're proposing a little bit more into capital than what was proposed last year.
Yeah.
We have a better idea of we were looking out, and Chief Abel actually started this, and it's something that I've always done is just, what are you going to need over the next 5 to 10 years, and start planning for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to say I want to, agree with everybody, but I agree with Tim Polisi about the cost of personnel and servicing, but I also agree with the comments that Marvin has made that, we were very thoughtful in our consideration of raising the taxpayers' contribution to our district. But I just want to make sure the thought process a year ago versus today as to how much we allocate to the reserve and how much the apparatus replacement schedule, it says we're going to spend. And so if we're close to
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, so we didn't, yeah, we've put a lot of funding into capital and into materials and services. Maybe we should have started with that. So yeah, the cuts, and typically your major cuts to have any effect would have to come from personnel services. But yeah, no, we've emphasized capital. And I think when you see the next, our replacement schedule, you'll see that that's a very important part of our future funding.
Thank you.
And I'm also assuming that we won't be debt financing. We certainly could. That'll be up to the board each year when we, so for next year, we're proposing to purchase a tender at $410,000. The board could say, let's pay cash for that, or let's debt finance that. And doesn't make a whole lot of difference in what we want to put into capital each year. We would still put the 375. It would just put out the cost for a few more years, but the bottom line would be the same. So we also want to replace a command vehicle next year, as well as a tender. And then we've got facility maintenance. That's another area of emphasis for us. We've got several of the stations, even if you take out Station 2 and Station 7, but we got, for example, Station 1 here. We do have some dry rot that has to be repaired. We've got some floors that need to be repaired. And again, those were put to the side when the revenues were not there to repair those. So we're hoping to start making those much needed repairs.
Chief,
Yes.
Jim Polisi here. On the Station 1 repairs, are any of those considered seismic?
We've had, I mean, seismic upgrades. We have already done that. We've received a grant for that. So we've made seismic, not all stations. And Matt, I don't know if you're still online, if you could pitch in, but we did have a seismic upgrade grant, but these would be more just like dry rot, which would not be related to seismic upgrade.
So when the dry rot was found, was that before or after the seismic upgrades were done at Station 1?
That's a great question, Jim. I don't know the answer to that. I can find out though.
Okay. And then on the apparatus replacement, on the debt financing, on those tenders, are we talking just straight water tenders? Or are we talking?
And I'll show you, yeah, I'll show you on the apparatus replacement schedule.
Thank you. And then, and that you'll also talk about the type 6s as well?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to go into a lot of detail, but you'll see it on the slide and we certainly can.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thanks, Chief.
Sure. So hopefully everybody can see this. This is just goes out to a plan that goes out to 2030 for me. And there's 4 slides here. So I don't want to go line by line, but I certainly can. I enjoyed talking about this. But what you're seeing here is I've got the list of every apparatus that we have, the year it was purchased, and then those numbers that going out under the years or under so from 2019 to 2030, and then those numbers below that, some which are in red, are the age of the apparatus. And then I've also concluded down towards the bottom, and the National Fire Protection Administration, which writes guidelines for the fire service, has come out with recommended service lives for fire apparatus. So for an engine, they assume that an engine will last 5 years, and then you put it in reserve status for 5 years. And what we mean by reserve status is that although you can still use the vehicle, it's not used for daily responses. It would only be used on a temporary basis. If you had to replace an engine that's out for maintenance, or if you had a major call, you could still use it. We get credit for reserve engines as well as frontline engines with our ISO, our insurance rating. So people would see a decrease in their insurance. Some people would see a decrease in their insurance rates if we keep our insurance rating where it should be. So if any of those vehicles that have red after it, those should be in reserve status. And in fact, several of our engines should probably not even be used, according to what the NFPA would be telling us. And so we're proposing starting to replace some of those engines. Our biggest need, and that's on the next slide, is a water tender. So that's coming first. So we pushed out that engine. And my philosophy has always been to move to smaller, more mobile apparatus, fire apparatus. So you see, that's why at $350,000 in 2022 for that engine. It's a smaller engine. It's fully functional. It does everything we need an engine to do. It's just much less expensive, probably about $200,000 less expensive than a full-size engine. Probably a little bit more maneuverability. So some of our narrow roads that we have to get up. So I think it would be much more useful for the district. And again,
Chief,
yeah, go ahead.
is that a type 3 you're talking?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. I didn't want to go into types. I didn't want to confuse people, but that's another abbreviation. But yeah, as the type numbers get larger, the vehicle gets smaller. We still will need some full-size engines, and you'll see that in later years. But I would like to see us use more. And Jim, I'm not talking about pumper tenders, which I think we need to discuss about as well.
Understood.
And this is not something that the board approves now and then we follow blindly. Each year, the capital, any apparatus purchase in capital would have to be approved. And so I would have to justify what we want to do. And the important thing is this is it's a flexible schedule. If we have a vehicle that's doing great, we do take care of our vehicles. They do tend to last longer than normal. We're only going to replace it if we have to. We won't blindly follow this schedule.
Chief, is there any chance of, on the rescues, converting our engines to rescue pumpers, where you show a potential change to Rescue 601 in 2021? Are there any of our engines that could be properly reformatted to cover both, well, call it what it is, all risk?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that's not how this department's been run. So it's a philosophy, a culture change, but I agree with you, Jim. I think, yeah, we should be able to handle an extrication with an engine. And so we're looking at that.
Chief Sam Spade, I got a question.
Shoot.
Yeah, on this page 2 there on your apparatus replacement schedule, what's SCBA with 300,000 in 2024?
I will talk about that coming up.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's a good question. So this is, so truck is our aerial apparatus. We don't anticipate replacing that. I know some board members would like us to sell it, but until that time, it's ours. Did we lose Ned?
No, I'm here.
Okay, that was for you, Ned.
I know.
Okay, and then under tender, that's our water tenders. Those are the apparatus that carry 2,000, 3,000 gallons of water, which we certainly need for our non-hydrant areas or those areas that don't have hydrants. We do have good hydrant system within the city, of course, but we still need hydrants. So we're proposing that we purchase a tender next fiscal year. We're assuming it's going to cost around $410,000. Again, it's going to be in that area. And then surplusing water tender 602, which is it's a tired vehicle. It needs to be surplused. Again, this purchase, it takes about a year once you place an order for you to get a fire apparatus, larger ones. So even if it was approved and we placed the order, it's not going to come in until late in the fiscal year.
Chief, can water tender 608 be refurbished?
You know, I have to look into that. I don't know what what kind of condition it's in, Jim, but we'll certainly look at that. And that would
It would save us a lot of money.
Yes.
If we could refurbish.
I've never seen a water tender refurbished. I suppose it can be done.
Oh, it can. They basically, break it down from the frame up, and they just put lighter materials, more,
Right.
current materials. And if the drivetrain's good and the frame is good, you could squeeze another 5 to 10 years out of it.
Yeah. So then the next page, and unfortunately I've got it called brush, but that's a wildland engine, a type 6 engine. That's one of the smaller engines. And what we're proposing, it's listed as skid units, and this is where we want to repurpose some of our pickup trucks that we have with the district, is that we put an actual pump into the bed. So of course you can't carry anything else in the bed, but you can use those vehicles for wildland fire. They're very useful for wildland fires or any area that you have difficulty getting access to. It'll have 300, 400 gallons of water, so you can do a lot of fire suppression with just those. We are just looking at it now. That project got sidetracked with the pandemic, but it's something that we hope to do this year. And then Sam, you're talking about, well, first of all, let me talk about command vehicles. So the board approved to replace the Durango, my vehicle. That's been put on hold. Ford is shut down right now. So unfortunately they didn't finish the vehicle. I doubt if it's going to be delivered before July. So at that point, I'll have to come back to the board and ask to reapportion those funds again. So we have those funds. We didn't spend that capital line item, but we may have to put it into next fiscal year. We've also got another command vehicle. And this originally, we put this in the budget when Chief Dickerson was here. We need to replace the fire prevention officer's vehicle. But with Chief Dickerson leaving, we took his vehicle, gave it to our fire prevention officer. So he does have a newer vehicle. It's not new, but newer. So we may not need this command vehicle for 2021. If we do hire a division chief or training chief or another fire operations chief, then we may have to purchase that vehicle anyway. And then I've included some major capital, which is SCBA. Those are the self-contained breathing apparatus. Those are air packs that we carry. Typically, you have to replace those around every 10 years. NFPA comes up with new guidelines every 5 years. And once you've gone through 2 cycles, usually your equipment is so out of date that they mandate that you replace it. But that's something you do all at one time. So this would be replacing all our SCBAs. And then we're proposing, yeah, go ahead.
It's Jim again. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no,
but
it's good.
are we looking at any long-term grants on those SCBAs?
We just had a grant. They won't let you have 2 grants for SCBAs.
Okay.
That's the only problem.
And well, if they're going to be changing the regulations on us for maintaining them, how about a regional grant?
I don't know that we'd be eligible for that. I think we did that before, but yeah.
All right, thank you.
Certainly. And then $30,000 a month for facilities. Again, I've listed some, just some of the changes we need to make at Station 1 here, because I see those every day. But most of our stations do need some attention. So now I've also included the budget for Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority. Again, Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority doesn't have a budget committee. It doesn't need a budget committee. I mean, all our revenue comes from either SVFR or Western Lane Ambulance District. They split that cost. And right now, Western Lane Ambulance, or the authority has no capital purchases. It's only administrative. So these are just administrative costs. Some administrative, other than personnel service, such as it still has to be, our books still have to be audited. So there's additional costs there.
Who approves this budget? The combined board?
The individual boards. So SVFR would approve, yes, we wanted to pay that amount. Western Lane would also have to approve that they want to pay that amount. And then we have a Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority board made up of 2 board members from each of the districts. So there would have to be some discussion on the approval of this budget.
So those 4 individuals kind of oversee that budget then?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, I would say all 10 members are really involved, but specifically it's those 4 members. And Ron, I think you're the president of the Welfia board, right? Did you want to say anything about that, or?
Well, you're correct, but nothing really to say or add other than I know the question in the past has come up as to why is there 4 members and if there's come to an agreement, and the charter is established if there is a 2-2 tie on a decision, it goes to both boards. Both boards must then vote, and each board individually must have a majority approval. So is that maybe it couldn't be approved by 5 from SVFR and 1 from Western Lane. It'd have to be 3 and 3. But anyway, it's if there's a tension and a 2-2 tie on any decisions, it goes to both boards.
Right. One thing that we have, and this is probably mostly for the current board members, is that I've taken the quick response unit out. We originally had proposed that, and I still think it's a good idea. I think there was some pushback. Do we need that response capability? Now we haven't changed. We still have the people. Western Lane Ambulance District still has their part-timers that we were going to put into that pool for the quick response unit, and SVFR is using those part-time people, that part-time position as a firefighter. So I'm hoping that during our strategic plan review we can bring that back up. But so it decreased the cost to being paid to Welfia, the authority, but it also increased personnel costs for the districts in that those people didn't move over to the authority. So it's a net neutral as far as revenue and expenditures, but this Welfia budget does not have the quick response unit in it at this time. And I think we're comfortable with that for the short term, and have more discussions with the board about that. And in the Welfia budget, I mentioned that earlier, we've included the training chief. That could be an operations chief for SVFR. That position would be employed by the authority, so it would be in this budget. But if we don't fill that position, then that would be about 150,000 off the total. That's of a fully burdened, including healthcare and wages and benefits. So it would decrease the total by about 150,000 or about 75,000 for each district. Okay. So now we get to all your questions. Any questions that you might have. We're recommending budget 1. I know there's a lot of variables in that, and unfortunately, I wish we didn't have labor negotiations going on right now with that budget. It's a budget, I think, that emphasizes our capital, our vehicle replacement. It emphasizes taking care of our facilities. It emphasizes taking care of our retirement obligations. And then it does enhance our service, but I don't think we're not giving up by adding those firefighters, and this hopefully this stresses Marvin, your question. I don't think we're giving up anything by adding those firefighters. Certainly we'll have a better response, and certainly we still rely on volunteers, but I think we're taking advantage of that levy reset, which was approved by the board last year. So we are here for any of your questions.
Just clarification on my part. Last year, we passed the budget with the provisos that we put 200,000 in ending fund balance, 300,000 apparatus replacement, about 88,000 contingency fund, and 100,000 in SCBA. That accounts for about 700,000. Did we follow through on all those recommendations?
We did. The board moved some of that to that PERS by that 300,000. They moved some of that from that fund. But in general, I think we're going to have, I think our expenses are going to, our revenue is going to exceed expenses quite a bit. But we did all that. Other than moving to PERS, some of that fund.
Yeah, that's where the 150,000 came from?
No, the 300,000 for this last year, or this current year.
I mean, the 150,000 in PERS?
So that's for next year. So we did 300,000 this year.
Okay, yeah, okay. The other thing that we've always had before in our package, just a small point, but we have a whole lot of acronyms in here, which are hard for the lay person to understand. And heretofore, Dinah, we had a page or page and a half that had all those explained, like SCBA, blah, 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 blah. That would be really helpful in the budget package, and I'd recommend that if we can do it.
Well, let me see if I can, and absolutely, I didn't think there was anything that I didn't explain. I was looking very closely for those, and you are absolutely correct. And if Alan Burns was on this call, he would absolutely be laying into me for those acronyms. And I apologize, but I am starting. I've got a 3-page document. I've started everything that's abbreviated that I'll give to the board members and to the budget committee members as well.
I've been here long enough to understand, but people like Sam brand new may not. I think that's why I asked the question.
And I apologize. Let me see if I can.
That's all right.
No,
For next year.
that's really good advice, and I'll make sure that I add that in next year.
It helped.
I don't know if you can see that.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So every time I come along with a acronym, I put it in my list. I apologize for that, but that's a very good point.
That would be a great footer for basically every board packet and every budget committee packet. Because
Yes.
even 3 years into this job, I think now, well, what is that again? I forget. Resource.
I like the idea of having 2 proposed budgets for obvious reasons. And depending on what the COVID outcome is, next year it may look entirely different.
Well, absolutely, and how labor negotiations are going to turn out. Yeah, it was difficult putting 2 budgets in there because we don't want to confuse everybody. But and these are just proposals. It's entirely up to the budget committee what our budget is going to look like. So these are just some suggestions. We are willing to modify however this committee feels that it needs to be modified.
It's a working document. It's a whole lot better than it was quite a few years, not very many years ago.
It's a good document, very good document.
Wonderful, thank you.
I want, my input is, this is by far the best budget document we've had since Buchanan left. And last year, I felt bad for you coming in a week before budget time. Like I said, I gave my 2 cents on what I had. The board runs the department, not the budget committee. I gave my 2 cents, and that's about what it was worth, 2 cents.
It's very much
Okay.
appreciated. And I got to give all the credit to Dina. She's done a fantastic job.
Yep.
She has given us numbers that we can believe in. And absolutely, it makes my job much easier.
Hey, Chief, I've got a question for you on truck 601. Do we own that outright?
Yes, we just finished paying on that. We
Okay.
did finance that.
Are you through with your presentation, Chief?
I am. This is up to you guys now.
Okay. Well, as chairman of the committee, I personally don't feel we need another meeting. I feel we can vote tonight. Is anybody opposed to voting tonight? Nope. Okay. Chief recommended that we go with budget 1. So what I'm looking for is somebody to make a motion to approve proposed budget number 1 for 2020-2021 fiscal year in the amount of $4,345,191.
I so move.
Can I get a second?
Second,
We have a motion and a second to approve budget number 1. Any question? Any discussion?
Well done.
So I'll call for the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Raise your hand.
How about the chief? Is he in favor?
Are you opposed? Opposed?
Looking at Michael.
I view that as.
We got to start over. We got to start over again for Western Lane now.
I viewed that as a unanimous yes. Did anybody see it?
That's great.
How much we paying for that thing?
Yeah,
that's-
really.
It's in the budget. You guys approved it.
Air attack, air attack.
Will Fiat logo on there.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Lucy.
Dina, did that one motion work for you?
Yes, it does. Are you good, Dina?
Well, we do also, so we
I'm
got
gonna
the
do the second
motion.
one now, if that one worked for you. So now
Okay,
I'm
good.
looking for a motion to approve the tax rate of $1, 1.5417 per $1,000 of assessed value.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a
Second.
second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, put them down. All opposed, raise your hand. Does that work for you, Dina?
That works for me. Thank you.
Is there any other business to be brought before this budget committee tonight?
No, Budget Committee, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Really
everybody.
appreciate it.
Very, very good document. I like the hold on. We didn't do public hearing.
Yeah, there was no public here.
Okay, so we don't have to announce it or anything.
No public.
Okay, sounds good. Good, great job, you guys. Like, bang the gavel, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Good job, Marvin.
Thank you, Dina.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for the
Yes,
video. It worked
yes.
great.
Good. Yes, we're learning.
That worked great.
And I got my temperature taken.
106.
Charge.
Can we sign off?
Yes.
We're done.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Night. Thank you.
Keep up the good work. Hey, Ann. Ann, you forgot your notebook. That's for you to keep.
Well, just really appreciate all your comments, lots of good feedback.